The Sony Xperia 1 Mark III may very well be the first smartphone ever to sport a 4K 120Hz display, but just how taxing is that display in terms of battery life? Well, the good thing is that Sony have increased its battery capacity to 4500 mAh and puts it on par with the OnePlus 9 Pro's 4500 mAh battery. The bad thing is that even phones without a 4K display house massive 5000 mAh batteries, namely the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra and Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra. And while Apple's iPhone 12 Pro Max may have a significantly smaller battery, iOS's optimizations have proven to dominate in terms of battery life. In order to keep things even between these 5 premium flagship devices, I have made sure to use a Lux Luminous meter to keep all phones' brightnesses at the same level. All devices have been updated to their latest available software, and just one thing to point out here, the OnePlus 9 Pro is running Oppo's ColorOS software instead of Oxygen OS because OnePlus have decided to ship Chinese variants of the phone with Oppo's OS. And since OnePlus recently announced its merger with Oppo, I won't be surprised if it's also going to change in the global market going forward. All Android devices are running Android 11 with the new MIUI 12.5 on the Xiaomi, and of course the iPhone is rocking its latest iOS 14.6. You may see some service bars on the Samsung, but I can assure you that all phones are free of SIM cards, so we'll be rocking them all on the same Wi-Fi network. Of course, the Xperia 1 Mark III's greatest highlight is that 4K display, while the Samsung, Xiaomi, and OnePlus are all rocking WQHD Plus panels, and the iPhone is running somewhere in between QHD and Full HD. This cannot be changed. And while the iPhone is capped at 60 Hz in terms of refresh rate, all other devices here are running all the way up to 120 Hz, with adaptive displays only seen on the Samsung and OnePlus. Can Sony's latest flagship keep up with some of the best Android smartphones around in terms of battery life? And can its larger battery capacity outshine the optimized iPhone 12 Pro Max in this real-life usage battery drain test? This is Tech Nick, and without further ado, let's find out. Before we get going, it's worth checking out that all phones are capped at 100%. They're all currently plugged in charge, and we're actually plugged in charge for the same amount of time. I will be using an emissivity level of 0.05 in order to test the temperatures of all devices throughout the test when it comes to individual intervals, and testing them out at the start. You can't really compare them much since they're all plugged in charge, so this is not really draining temperature at the start, but more so charging temps. Nevertheless, the iPhone is the coolest and the OnePlus is the hottest. Starting the test over here, we have that timer interval at the top right hand corner, which is in relation to the battery percentage below the branding of each device and above the phones. Of course, that percentage only changes once we clock in the first time interval, and the temps will also change alongside that, moving into interval instead of charging. If you are rusty on specs, at the bottom I have a full list of specs over there for you all to gawk your eyes at. And after the first 30-minute mark interval, we have 94% on the Sony, which is trailing the pack here. Just in front of that is the S21 Ultra. Then we have the Mi 11 Ultra with 97%, 98% on the OnePlus, and it hasn't even moved a smidge on the iPhone, still sitting at a rock solid 100%, with the iPhone staying the coolest in terms of interval and peak, and the Mi 11 Ultra staying the hottest at the interval and peak. The peak will change whenever it gets the hottest, that will then stick, but the interval changes throughout the test. After the 1 hour time interval, we have 89% on the Xperia 1 Mark III, which is now trading blows with the S21 Ultra at the same percentage, 91% on the Mi 11 Ultra, only doing slightly better than those two, 93% on the OnePlus 9 Pro, 2% better than the Mi 11 Ultra, and still at the top is the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Not really surprising since it does such a great job in terms of optimization with its software and hardware and battery capacity, even though it has the smallest cell around. And after an hour and 30 minutes, we have 81% on the Xperia, which is now 2% below the S21 Ultra, and the S21 Ultra is now 3% ahead of the Mi 11 Ultra. The OnePlus 9 Pro is 6% ahead of the Mi 11 Ultra, 3% ahead of the S21 Ultra as well, and 91% on the iPhone 12 Pro Max, still leading the pack over here. For those of you who have not noticed, at the bottom right hand corner I do showcase the current app and what we're doing within that app. And after the 2 hour mark interval, we have 75% on the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III, 79% on the S21 Ultra, and the Mi 11 Ultra is trading blows with the Xperia 1 Mark III at the same 75%, 81% on the OnePlus 9 Pro. Even though it has a smaller battery than the Samsung, it is doing slightly better over here, and still leading the pack, of course, no surprise, the iPhone 12 Pro Max, which is still keeping the internals nice and cool with 34.9 degrees in Celsius in the last interval. interval, as opposed to the Mi 11 Ultra, which is over 40 degrees in Celsius, being the hottest of the test. After the 2 hour and 30 minute mark interval, we have 69% on the Xperia 1 Mark III, which is now 1% behind the Mi 11 Ultra's 70%. We have 75% on the S21 Ultra, which is almost matching the OnePlus 9 Pro now with 76%. Of course, still leading the pack, the iPhone 12 Pro Max with 83%, which is now still the coolest, but the hottest in the last interval was the Sony, and the hottest peak still overall, which sticks for now, is the Mi 11 Ultra until another phone gets hotter than that throughout the entirety of the test. After 3 hours, we have 64% on the Sony, 71% on the Samsung, 73% on the OnePlus, still leading opposed to the Samsung and Sony and Xiaomi, which is now ahead of the Sony at 65%. And once again, still leading the pack here is the iPhone 12 Pro Max, though slightly dropping a lot more quickly than it was earlier on in the test. We're reaching that 3 hour, 30 minute mark interval, and now that we're sitting at 57% on the Sony, 10% behind the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra 67%, which is now matching the OnePlus 9 Pro 67%, and the Sony and Xiaomi are once again pretty neck and neck here with 59% on the Xiaomi as opposed to the 57 on the Sony, 74% on the iPhone 12 Pro Max, which is dropping pretty quickly now. It is just 7% ahead of the S21 Ultra and OnePlus 9 Pro. But you got to remember that it does have the smallest battery, but while it does have the smallest battery, it has the lowest refresh rate, just at 60 Hz, and the lowest resolution, somewhere sitting between QHD and Full HD, where the others are all rocking QHD panels, or 4K, that being on the Sony, and 120 Hz, which sucks up a hell of a lot of juice. Moving on to the camera app over here, we're recording selfie video at 1080p 30 fps since the Sony is capped at this, and since all my previous tests that I've done, I have used selfie video at 1080p 30 fps even if phones do support 60 frames per second when using selfie video recording. I try to keep all my battery drain tests exactly the same so that you can compare the results across the entirety of my channel in the past 2 years. Remember, you cannot compare this to other channels' battery drain tests since we use different brightnesses and different apps on the phones, and different settings as well as Full HD or QHD, 120 Hz or 60 Hz, so on and so forth. Now recording main video 4K 30 FPS for the same exact reason, since I've kept it the same on all previous tests. And the Sony can only go up to 4K 30 FPS when in its regular app it has to go into its Photo or Cinema Pro app, I should say, in order to unlock 4K 60 FPS. Make sure you check out my full review on the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. It is pretty interesting. I do absolutely adore the device, so it does have a few flaws. Reaching that 5 hour 30 minute mark interval with the iPhone 12 Pro Max is still in the lead over here. The Xiaomi decided to go and overheat over there, no surprise that time around. I thought this would be fixed with Mi 12.5, I guess not. 16% on the Sony after 5 hours and 35 minutes, 19% on the Mi 11 Ultra after 5 hours and 35 minutes, of course, as well. Just 3% ahead of the Sony, 33% on the Samsung, which is now 3% ahead of the OnePlus's 30%, and still leading the pack is the iPhone 12 Pro Max with 41%, and which is still the coolest device at 48.3 degrees in Celsius, as opposed to the Xperia reaching the highest interval and peak almost 57 degrees in Celsius after the 5 hour 30 minute mark interval. Hitting the 6 hour mark interval, we have just 5% left on the Sony and 2% left on the Mi 11 Ultra, which is going to be the first to clock out here. Is the Sony going to triumph the massive battery mammoth Mi 11 Ultra? And yes, it does. The Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra clocks out here with 6 hours and 5 minutes, which is actually worse than my last test when I ran MIUI 12.0 instead of 12.5 this time around. Slightly disappointing there from Xiaomi. How much longer can the Xperia go? And it decides to say cheers to us after 6 hours and 21 minutes, which is actually pretty fantastic considering it's rocking a 4K 6.5 inch 120 Hz refresh rate display. 6 hours 21 minutes does have a better percentage per minute reading compared to the Xiaomi, and a better milliamp hour per minute reading compared to the Xiaomi as well, considering it finished later on, and it also has a slightly smaller battery at 4,500 as opposed to the 5,000 milliamp hours that we see on the Xiaomi. 6 hour and 30 minute mark interval, 20% on the Samsung, 13 on the OnePlus, and 27% on the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Of course, the iPhone looks like it's going to win. We'll have to see if there's going to be any twists and turns going forward from here on out, but how much longer will the OnePlus last, and can it indeed beat the Samsung? That would be very surprising considering it has a much smaller battery. 13% on the Samsung after 7 hours, 7% on the OnePlus, and 22% on the iPhone. The iPhone has finally reached the red zone, but has still stayed the coolest here, with the last interval being 35.4 degrees in Celsius, and the hottest in the last interval was the Samsung, surprisingly, at 43.1 degrees in Celsius. The OnePlus decides to say cheers to us after 7 hours and 29 minutes, which is pretty impressive considering it did worse in my previous test. We'll get to that at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that, where I compare it to other devices as well as its predecessors. And after 7 hours and 31 minutes, we have 7% left on the S21 Ultra within its tank, of course, and 17% within the iPhone 12 Pro Max's battery capacity, even though the iPhone 12 Pro Max has a significantly smaller battery cell compared to the S21 Ultra. The S21 Ultra, or Samsung, like to dim their devices when it reaches 5%, so I brought the Lux Luminous reading back up to match the brightness of the iPhone, and the Samsung says cheers to us after 7 hours and 57 minutes. Not too shabby, almost reached that 8-hour mark. We have seen it go over 9 hours when it is set to 60 Hz, so I guess adaptive is not necessarily the best thing in terms of battery endurance when it comes to the Samsung. It did have the best percentage per minute reading, but it didn't beat the OnePlus in terms of milliamp hour per minute reading, since the OnePlus has a smaller battery and they only finished within 30 minutes of each other. The iPhone is still going after 8 minutes at 12%, after 8 hours at 12%, my bad over there. And moving on, can it reach the 9-hour mark interval? It usually has no sweat, reaching that 6% after 8 hours and 30 minutes. And of course, it has still kept the coolest peak temperature at 48.3 degrees in Celsius. The Xiaomi hit new heights here with 65.1 degrees in Celsius, which is absolutely insane. The iPhone's last interval was sitting at 37.4 degrees in Celsius. And even though we've finished the test over here, I am running the apps the same way that I would if other smartphones were to surpass the 8-hour mark interval, in a loop going back from the start, skipping a couple apps and going into some heavier apps and some lighter apps respectively. 9 hours and 7, 9 hours and 8, 9 hours and 9 minutes. Can the iPhone reach? No, it doesn't. 9 hours and 13 minutes, 0% on the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Absolutely phenomenal, but you got to remember 60 Hz display and not necessarily a QHD panel. Still, nevertheless, a great score over there for the iPhone with the best milliamp hour per minute reading and percentage per minute. Fifth place over here, we have the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra with a subpar 6 hours and 5 minutes. Pretty disappointed here since it has a massive 5000 milliamp hour battery. Next up, fourth place is the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. Pretty impressive considering it has a 4K 120Hz display with a 4500 milliamp hour battery, 6 hours and 21 minutes. I'm actually okay with that. Third place, we have the OnePlus 9 Pro, same size cell as the Sony before it, but 7 hours and 29 minutes is an hour ahead of that, even more than an hour ahead of that, but it lacks the 4K display. Second place is the Galaxy S21 Ultra with a massive 7 hours and 57 minutes, thanks to that wonderful 5000 milliamp hour batteries. Pretty impressed with it. First place, very impressed with it, the iPhone 12 Pro Max, 9 hours and 13 minutes. It never seems to disappoint, always hits over 9 hours every single time, though it does have a 60 Hz panel. And when comparing these devices to their predecessors, as you can see right at the top of the screen over here, the Xperia 1 Mark II hits 6 hours and 55 minutes with a smaller 4000 milliamp hour cell, and it actually beats its successor, the Xperia 1 Mark III, though it was only a 60 Hz refresh rate. The Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra hit 7 hours and 33 minutes with the same settings and the same sized battery capacity, so it's definitely seen an improvement this time around. The iPhone 12 Pro Max is pretty much on par with the iPhone 11 Pro Max's 9 hours and 12 minutes. The OnePlus 9 Pro has pretty much stayed the same in terms of last year's OnePlus 8 Pro, so that's always good to see. And the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra's predecessor, the Mi 10 Ultra, did it in 7 hours and 36 minutes, which is an hour and a half better than the Mi 11 Ultra, even though it has 500 milliamp hours less in terms of battery capacity, though it was just limited to Full HD since it didn't have an option for QHD. And if you take a look right at the bottom of the screen, if they all had the exact same size battery capacity, the Samsung and Xiaomi's capacity of 5000 milliamps, the iPhone would stay in first, but jump all the way up to 12 hours and 30 minutes. Second place would now be the OnePlus 9 Pro with 8 hours and 19 minutes, leaving the S21 Ultra in the dust. And then fourth place would still be the Sony, 7 hours and 3 minutes this time around with a slightly bigger bumped up battery. And last place would still be the Mi 11 Ultra. And one last thing to note here is that in my previous battery drain test of the Mi 11 Ultra, I tested it out with MIUI 12.0. Now we have MIUI 12.5. All of us thought that the battery would drain a little less this time around, but it didn't. Last time we got 6 hours and 32 minutes. This time we got 6 hours and 5 minutes. And both times I did the exact same apps for the exact same amount of time and on the exact same settings of QHD and 120 Hz. Let me know what you guys think of that in the comment section down below. This is Tech Nick, and I'll catch you in the next one.